I never thought that honoring my mother's dying wish would tear my family apart forever. But as I stood by the Schuylkill River that cold October morning, clutching the urn containing her ashes, I had no idea I was about to unleash a secret that would shatter everything I believed about the woman who raised me. My name is Ashley, and this is the story of how one promise destroyed my family and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and impending death when Mom grabbed my hand with what little strength she had left. Her once vibrant blue eyes, now clouded with pain and medication, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Ashley, honey," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beeping of the machines keeping her alive. "I need you to promise me something." I leaned closer, my ear almost touching her cracked lips, desperate to catch every word. The cancer had taken so much from her already, her hair, her energy, her laughter, but in that moment, her grip on my hand felt surprisingly strong. "Promise me you'll take my ashes to the river," she continued, each word seeming to cost her tremendous effort. "The spot where your father and I first met, near the old stone bridge. I want to be scattered there, where it all began." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. This was my mother, the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees, celebrated my small victories, and held me through my worst heartbreaks. If this was what she wanted, how could I possibly refuse? "I promise, Mom," I managed to choke out, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll make sure you get there." The next 3 days passed in a blur of medical consultations, family visits, and the gradual acceptance that we were losing her. My older sister Kimberly flew in from Seattle, her usual composed demeanor cracking as she saw Mom's deteriorated condition. Dad, Donald, maintained his stoic exterior, but I caught him crying in the hospital chapel when he thought no one was looking. We took turns sitting with Mom, sharing memories, telling her we loved her, and trying to prepare ourselves for the inevitable. On Thursday evening, as autumn rain pelted the hospital windows, Mom slipped away peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind a void that felt impossible to fill. The funeral arrangements became our first battleground, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Kimberly insisted on a traditional burial in the family plot at Laurel Hill Cemetery, where our grandparents and great-grandparents rested. "It's what the family has always done," she argued, her voice sharp with grief and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Mom belongs with her people, not scattered to the wind like some hippie fantasy." Dad nodded in agreement, citing practical concerns about permanence and tradition. But I held firm to my promise, explaining Mom's specific request about the river and the stone bridge where she and Dad had their first date. "That's ridiculous, Ashley," Kimberly snapped during one particularly heated discussion in Dad's living room. "Mom never mentioned any river to me. She always talked about wanting to be buried next to Grandma Rose." Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the coffee table as she spoke, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Besides, what kind of daughter scatters her mother's ashes in some dirty river? It's disrespectful." The accusation stung, but I refused to back down. Mom had been crystal clear about her wishes, and I wasn't going to let family pressure make me break the most important promise I'd ever made. Dad tried to mediate, but his heart wasn't really in it. "The will doesn't specify anything about the river," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "It just mentions cremation and leaves the details to the family's discretion." I could see the conflict in his weathered face. He wanted to honor his wife's memory, but he also didn't want to cause more family discord. "Maybe we could do both," he suggested weakly. "Keep some ashes for the cemetery and scatter some at the river?" But Kimberly's expression made it clear that compromise wasn't an option. She wanted Mom buried traditionally, period, and she seemed to view my insistence on the river as some kind of betrayal. The tension reached a breaking point the night before the memorial service. Kimberly cornered me in the kitchen of our childhood home, her eyes blazing with an anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Why are you being so stubborn about this?" she demanded, her voice rising despite Dad's presence in the next room. "What's so special about that stupid river anyway? Mom barely even mentioned it." Something in her tone made me pause. There was a desperation there, an almost frantic quality that didn't match her usual controlled demeanor. "She mentioned it to me," I replied firmly, though doubt began to creep into my mind. "She was very specific about the location, Kim. It meant something important to her. The memorial service was beautiful, but tense, with unspoken conflict simmering beneath the surface of our shared grief. Friends and family members offered their condolences, sharing warm memories of Mom's kindness and infectious laugh, while Kimberly and I maintained a polite facade that fooled no one who knew us well. Dad delivered a touching eulogy about their 42 years of marriage, describing how they'd met during a college photography class and had their first real conversation by the Schuylkill River. She was taking pictures of the old stone bridge, he said, his voice breaking slightly, and I was pretending to be interested in her camera equipment just to have an excuse to talk to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was confirmation of the very location Mom had specified for her final resting place. After the service, as guests mingled in the church fellowship hall, I overheard several family friends expressing surprise about the cremation. "I always thought Margaret wanted to be buried," whispered Aunt Carol to her husband. "She used to talk about the family plot all the time." These comments gnawed at me throughout the afternoon, planting seeds of doubt that I tried desperately to ignore. Had I misunderstood Mom's final request? Was grief making me remember things differently than they actually happened? But every time I questioned myself, I could hear her voice clearly in my memory, weak but determined, asking me to take her to the river where it all began. The next morning, I made my decision. With or without family support, I was going to honor Mom's wishes. I picked up her ashes from the funeral home, my hands trembling as I signed the release forms and accepted the simple wooden urn that contained all that remained of the woman who had given me life. The weight of it surprised me. Somehow, I'd expected it to be heavier, more substantial. This small container held the physical essence of someone who had loomed so large in my world, and the disconnect between her memory and this tangible reality left me feeling hollow and disoriented. I drove to the river alone, parking near the old stone bridge that Dad had mentioned in his eulogy. The October morning was crisp and clear, with golden sunlight filtering through the autumn leaves and casting dancing shadows on the water's surface. This was supposed to be a sacred moment, a final act of love and devotion, but instead, I felt isolated and uncertain. Should I have insisted that the family come with me? Was I being selfish by proceeding without their blessing? The questions swirled in my mind as I walked to the water's edge, clutching the urn against my chest like a shield against my own doubts. Standing on the riverbank, I tried to imagine Mom and Dad as young college students, falling in love in this very spot. The bridge looked exactly as it must have decades ago, its weathered stone arches reflecting perfectly in the calm water below. I could almost see them, Mom with her long brown hair and bright smile, Dad awkward but charming in his earnest attempts to impress her. This place had witnessed the beginning of their love story, and now it would mark the end of Mom's earthly journey. The symmetry felt right, even if the circumstances surrounding it had become so complicated and painful. I opened the urn with shaking hands, my heart pounding as I prepared to fulfill my promise. The ashes were finer than I'd expected, almost powder-like, and they caught the morning breeze as I began to scatter them across the water's surface. "I love you, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I hope this is what you really wanted." Some of the ashes drifted back toward shore, settling on the rocks and fallen leaves, while others disappeared into the current and began their journey toward the Delaware River and eventually the ocean. It felt both final and eternal, a release that somehow made Mom's presence feel both closer and more distant than ever before. The drive home was a blur of conflicted emotions, relief at having kept my promise, sadness at the finality of the act, and growing anxiety about how my family would react. I'd sent a text to Dad and Kimberly letting them know what I'd done, but I hadn't waited for their responses before turning off my phone. Part of me hoped they would understand, that they would see my actions as a loving tribute to Mom's memory rather than a betrayal of family tradition. But deep down, I knew that this decision had probably damaged our relationships in ways that might never fully heal. When I finally arrived home and turned my phone back on, the flood of angry messages confirmed my worst fears. Kimberly had left 3 voicemails, each one more furious than the last, accusing me of being selfish and disrespectful. Dad's single text was somehow worse in its quiet disappointment. "I wish you had waited for us to discuss this further. Your mother deserved better than a unilateral decision." The words hit me like physical blows, and I sank onto my couch, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Had I honored Mom's wishes, or had I simply imposed my own interpretation of what she wanted? The uncertainty was eating me alive, and I realized that this was only the beginning of the fallout from my decision. The family dinner that Sunday was a disaster waiting to happen, but Dad insisted we needed to talk things through like adults. I arrived at the house where I'd grown up, my stomach churning with anxiety and residual grief. The familiar smell of Dad's pot roast should have been comforting, but instead, it reminded me of all the family meals Mom had lovingly prepared in this same kitchen. Kimberly was already there, her posture rigid and her expression cold as she barely acknowledged my arrival. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and I wondered if this was how our family would be from now on, forever divided by my decision to honor what I believed were Mom's final wishes. "I can't believe you did that without consulting us," Kimberly began, before we'd even sat down to eat. Her voice was controlled but seething with anger, and I could see Dad's jaw tighten as he tried to maintain some semblance of family harmony. "Do you have any idea how that made me feel? Finding out through a text message that you'd scattered our mother's ashes like you were feeding ducks at the park?" The comparison stung because it trivialized something that had felt sacred and meaningful to me. I'd been careful and reverent, speaking words of love and gratitude as I released Mom to the river she'd specifically requested. But Kimberly's interpretation made it sound callous and thoughtless. "She asked me to do it, Kim," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside me. Her exact words were to take her to the river where she and Dad first met. I was honoring her wishes, not making some arbitrary decision. But even as I spoke, I could hear the defensive tone creeping into my voice. The doubt that had been growing since the memorial service was becoming harder to ignore, especially when faced with my family's united opposition. Had Mom really been that specific about the location? Or had I filled in details that weren't actually there? Grief had a way of distorting memory, and I was beginning to question my own recollection of that final conversation. Dad set down his fork and looked at me with tired eyes that seemed to have aged years in the past week. "Ashley, honey, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but your mother never mentioned the river to me. Not once in all our conversations about end-of-life planning." His words hit me like a physical blow because Dad had been Mom's closest confidant for over 4 decades. If she hadn't shared this wish with him, why would she have told only me? She always talked about the family plot, about being buried next to her parents and grandparents. That's what she wanted, to be part of the family legacy, not scattered to the wind. The conversation deteriorated from there, with accusations flying and old family dynamics reasserting themselves in ugly ways. Kimberly accused me of being attention-seeking and dramatic, claiming I'd always been Mom's favorite and was now trying to monopolize her memory. I fired back that she'd never been around enough to know what Mom really wanted, having moved across the country and visited maybe twice a year. Dad tried to mediate, but his heart wasn't in it, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes every time he looked at me. The woman who had held our family together was gone, and without her stabilizing presence, we were falling apart at the seams. "You know what really bothers me?" Kimberly said, her voice rising to a pitch that would have made Mom cringe. "You've always acted like you were the perfect daughter, the one who stayed close to home and took care of everyone. But this isn't about Mom at all. This is about you feeling special, being the chosen one who got the secret final wish." Her words were designed to wound, and they found their target with devastating accuracy. Was there truth in her accusation? Had my decision been motivated by love for Mom or by some unconscious need to be the favored child, even in death? The possibility made me sick to my stomach. I left that dinner feeling more isolated and confused than ever before. The family I'd always counted on for support and understanding had turned against me, and I was beginning to wonder if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. That night, I lay awake, replaying every detail of Mom's final days, trying to separate actual memories from wishful thinking. Had she really been that specific about the river? Or had I projected my own romantic notions onto her dying words? The uncertainty was torture, made worse by the knowledge that I could never ask her for clarification. The dead don't get to defend the living's interpretation of their final wishes. The next few days passed in a haze of second-guessing and regret. I found myself avoiding Dad's calls and Kimberly's increasingly hostile text messages, unable to face their continued disappointment and anger. Friends who tried to offer comfort seemed to sense the family drama lurking beneath my grief, and their well-meaning platitudes felt hollow and inadequate. I'd thought that fulfilling Mom's final request would bring me peace and closure, but instead it had opened a wound that seemed to grow deeper and more painful with each passing day. I was beginning to understand that some promises, no matter how well-intentioned, can destroy the very relationships they're meant to honor. 2 weeks after the river incident, I was cleaning out Mom's bedroom when I found the letter that would change everything forever. Dad had asked me to help sort through her personal belongings, a task that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. Each item I touched, her favorite sweater, the romance novels she loved to read, the jewelry box that played Moon River when opened, carried memories that threatened to overwhelm me. I was working through her dresser drawers when my fingers brushed against something unexpected, an envelope taped to the bottom of the lowest drawer, hidden where no casual search would ever find it. My heart began to race as I carefully peeled away the tape and saw my name written in Mom's familiar handwriting across the front. Inside was a letter dated just 3 months before her diagnosis, written in the shaky script that had become increasingly common as her arthritis worsened. "My dearest Ashley," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've hopefully fulfilled my final request about the river. I know this might seem strange to your father and sister, and I'm sorry for the burden I'm placing on you, but there are things about my life that I could never tell them while I was alive." My hands trembled as I continued reading, a growing sense of dread settling in my stomach. This wasn't going to be a simple explanation about why she'd chosen the river over the family plot. This was something much more complicated and potentially devastating. "The truth is, Ashley, that river holds memories that have nothing to do with your father, despite what I may have told you about where we first met. Yes, we did have our first real conversation there, but that's not why I want my ashes scattered in that water. For 15 years, from 1995 to 2010, I met someone else at that bridge every Tuesday afternoon. His name was Michael, and he was the love of my life in a way that your father, bless his heart, never could be." The words seemed to leap off the page and slap me across the face. My mother, the woman I'd idolized for her devotion to family and marriage, had been having an affair for 15 years. The revelation was so shocking that I had to read the paragraph 3 times before it fully sank in. The letter continued with details that made my stomach churn and my worldview crumble. Michael had been a photographer who worked for the city, documenting historical sites and landmarks. They'd met when he was taking pictures of the old stone bridge for a municipal project, and Mom had been walking there during one of her shopping trips that she'd used as cover for her secret meetings. "I know this makes me a hypocrite and a liar," she wrote, "but Michael understood parts of me that I'd buried when I became a wife and mother. With him, I could be the woman I was before I learned to be what everyone else needed me to be." The pain in her words was evident even through the careful script, and I could almost hear her voice speaking these confessions that she'd never been able to make aloud. I ended things with Michael when he got transferred to Portland in 2010, but I never stopped loving him or missing what we had together. When the cancer diagnosis came, I realized I wanted my final resting place to be where I felt most truly myself, even if I could never explain that to your father or Kimberly. "I'm asking you to scatter my ashes there, not because it's where your father and I began, but because it's where I learned what real passion felt like, even if it was wrong and selfish and destructive." The letter went on to explain that she'd chosen me as the keeper of this secret because I'd always been the most understanding and least judgmental of her children, the one most likely to honor her wishes even if I didn't fully understand them. The final paragraphs were an apology and a warning wrapped into one devastating conclusion. "I know this revelation will hurt you, and I'm sorry for that burden. But I also know that Kimberly suspects something. She's always been too perceptive for her own good, and I think she's figured out that my Tuesday errands weren't what they seemed. If she pushes hard enough, she might uncover the truth anyway, and I'd rather you heard it from me than discovered it through her investigation. Please don't hate me for being human, Ashley. I loved your father and you children more than life itself, but I also loved Michael in a way that made me feel alive during some very dark years of my marriage." I sat on Mom's bedroom floor for what felt like hours, the letter clutched in my shaking hands as the full implications of her confession washed over me. Everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. The devoted wife and mother I'd admired was actually a woman who'd been living a double life for 15 years. The romantic story about mom and dad meeting at the river was just a convenient cover for her real reason for wanting her ashes scattered there. And worst of all, I'd unknowingly helped her take this secret to her grave by honoring a final wish that was based on deception rather than the pure love I'd imagined. The sound of Dad's voice calling my name from downstairs snapped me back to reality. I quickly folded the letter and shoved it into my purse, my mind racing with questions and implications. Should I tell him the truth about why Mom really wanted to be scattered at the river? Should I share this revelation with Kimberly, who apparently had suspected something all along? Or should I keep this secret buried, protecting Dad's memory of his marriage and preserving what was left of our family's stability? As I walked downstairs to face him, I realized that Mom's final gift to me wasn't just the burden of her secret. It was the impossible choice of what to do with the truth that could destroy everything we had left. The decision of whether to reveal Mom's secret consumed me for 3 agonizing days. I found myself staring at that letter until the words blurred together, weighing the devastating consequences of truth against the suffocating burden of deception. Every time I looked at Dad, I saw a man who still wore his wedding ring and spoke about Mom with the reverence of someone who believed he'd had a faithful marriage for 42 years. How could I destroy that illusion? But then I'd remember Kimberly's suspicious questions and her inexplicable anger about the river, and I wondered if keeping this secret was actually protecting anyone or just prolonging an inevitable reckoning. The weight of Mom's confession felt like it was crushing me from the inside, making it impossible to eat, sleep, or think about anything else. I'd become the unwilling guardian of a truth that could either free my family from years of hidden lies or destroy what little stability we had left after losing the woman who'd held us all together. On Thursday evening, I made my choice. I called Dad and Kimberly, asking them to meet me at the house for what I described as important information about Mom. The drive there felt like a funeral procession, with Mom's letter burning like acid in my purse and my heart hammering against my ribs. When I arrived, they were already waiting in the living room, where we'd had so many family discussions over the years. The same room where we'd argued about the river, where we'd planned Mom's funeral, where we'd shared countless Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. The irony wasn't lost on me that this space, which had witnessed so much love and laughter, was about to become the site of our family's final destruction. I sat down across from them, pulled out the letter with trembling hands, and began to read Mom's confession aloud, my voice breaking with every devastating revelation about Michael and the 15-year affair that had redefined everything we thought we knew about our mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally a crushing devastation that aged him 10 years in 10 seconds. Kimberly's reaction was different, but equally painful to witness. She didn't look surprised so much as vindicated, as if this confirmation of her suspicions brought no satisfaction, only a bitter acknowledgement of truths she'd hoped weren't real. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice hollow and defeated. All those Tuesday errands, the way she'd come home looking guilty and distracted, the phone calls she'd end abruptly when we walked into the room. I knew something was wrong, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Dad said nothing, just sat there staring at his hands while tears rolled down his cheeks, and I realized that my decision to reveal the truth had accomplished exactly what I'd feared. It had shattered the last remnants of our family's foundation and left us all drowning in the wreckage of Mom's deception. In the weeks that followed, we each dealt with the revelation in our own destructive ways. Dad threw himself into work with an obsession that worried his colleagues, staying at the office until midnight and working weekends to avoid being alone with his thoughts. Kimberly became bitter and angry, lashing out at anyone who tried to offer comfort and refusing to attend the grief counseling sessions that might have helped her process this double loss of both her mother and her idealized image of her parents' marriage. As for me, I was consumed by guilt and regret, wondering if I should have kept Mom's secret buried and allowed my family to grieve in peace rather than forcing them to confront this painful truth. The river where I'd scattered her ashes became a symbol not of love and devotion, but of betrayal and deception, and I couldn't drive past that bridge without feeling sick to my stomach. Our family dinners stopped entirely. Holiday plans were canceled, and we drifted apart like strangers who happened to share the same last name and the same devastating knowledge about the woman who'd given us life, but had also, in the end, destroyed our ability to trust in love, marriage, or the stories we tell ourselves about the people we think we know.